Daniel Macleod speaks to us about finding God in lockdown using Psalms 42 and 43 to help us.
Today what I want to do is just share for a few minutes really from Psalm 42 and 43, because in many ways these two psalms that commentators really consider as one have been with us through this lockdown period. And really, as things are beginning to turn now, and we're quite aware of that lockdown is easing and we're looking to move back to some new normal together. I just kind of want to reflect on some lessons learned from Psalm 42 and 43. And really, they've walked with us. I know as a team, we've read these out to each other and encouraged one another with these words on a number of times. And Richard himself has written a song that we're going to respond to at the end of this message from Psalm 42 and 43. And what I want to do is just share some thoughts really from this, some reflections that I've had from these Psalms, because in many ways these Psalms kind of reflect so much of where we're at right now. Firstly, we're told in the Psalm that he was not able to actually go to the house of God and be involved in the corporate praise and the multitude who were part of the festival. The Jews at the time, a Jewish male, would have to go to the Jerusalem 3 times a year. He couldn't go for some reason. He couldn't be part of that throng, and he felt that he missed out. And that's exactly what we've kind of been through in these months. And he was emotionally struggling. We read these words at the beginning: as a deer pants for flowing streams, so my soul pants for God. My soul thirsts for God. He says, my tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all the day long, where is your God? This was a man who was struggling in his soul. And almost everyone I talk to has some experience of an emotional roller coaster that we've gone through this lockdown, whether you've had like zero to do or whether you've had far too much to do. There is a sense in which people are weary. I think you might experience some tiredness. You might think, I don't know why I feel tired, but I do. There is something in me I feel more sensitive than normal. My emotions feel more raw at the moment, right? And I'm not quite sure why. There is an inner angst that many of us are feeling, and somewhat of a depression. And the psalmist talks about how he deals with these emotions. And I think we've got a lot to learn from this ancient poem. And this is my conviction, and this is my goal, as it were, today, is that this moment could be a moment of spiritual awakening. This moment could be a moment where we walk into a new spiritual awakening, personally and together. Because something needs to precede a spiritual awakening. Something needs to come before we actually receive a spiritual awakening and fullness in God's presence. And that is an awareness of a spiritual lack. There has to be an awareness that actually I need something that is more than just this world. I need something that is more than what my job can give me, even my family, even my loved ones. And a moment like this has given us a moment to pause and reflect and actually think, yeah, there is something in my soul that my soul so desperately craves that the stuff in this world is not giving me. And if we can get to that point of admitting a lack in our soul, that there is something in my being that needs more than this life, if you can be honest with yourself and get to that place and saying, yeah, there is more, that is the foundation and the catalyst for a spiritual awakening. We're spiritual people. And unless we deal with our spirit, we will never be whole. We will never be the type of people that we could be, because we were made spiritual. And this psalm speaks into this. And so I really want to just share some thoughts on how we can pursue spiritual awakening. And the first is this: you need to know that if you've been struggling with your emotions over these months, you are not alone. You're not alone. It's crazy because the psalmist here, he is so honest. He is so vulnerable and authentic with his feelings. He just puts it out there. And this is in the Bible. So this is in the text for Christians. This is in the Bible where we say, this is what it looks like to live a Christian life. This is our guide. This is how we know how to find God. And in this Bible, there are psalms about those who are struggling with spiritual depression, with anxiety, with inner emptiness. He says, my tears have been my food day and night. He is struggling. And this is in the Bible. It's crazy. And this has been deliberately kept in because something so important has to be communicated, that if you are struggling in your soul, you are not alone. Great men and great women who have had great spiritual awakenings have experienced the same thing. They know what it is like to walk through the dark night of the soul. I remember when I went to university, and I was gung-ho and enthusiastic. And I was a Christian. I was kind of getting to know Jesus, the early days of following Jesus. And I remember just running around night to night to night to night, trying to make friends, connecting with people. And it just got to one of those nights and something just broke in me. And it got to like midnight, half midnight or something. And I was out with friends, trying to make friends, and they weren't Christians. And so they were getting up to stuff that Christians are not supposed to. And I just suddenly had this dawning sense of loneliness suddenly in the middle of this club, just feeling like I'm utterly alone. And I left and I went home, and it was like 12:30, 1 o'clock, and I came back to my dorm room, and I just felt utterly lonely and broken, realizing that actually I'd accumulated months of inner emotional tiredness and a sense of not being connected. And I just turned to some of the Psalms, just absent-mindedly, and suddenly these words from the Psalms struck me like never before. Because the thing is that I felt like I was the only Christian who had ever felt down, and I was beating myself up about it. I was the only Christian that surely had ever felt lonely. And suddenly I was reading through the Psalms, and it hit me in my soul. It's like great men in the past had experienced deep depressions, anxieties, loneliness. I was not alone. And in that dorm room at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I just broke down and wept. But they weren't bad tears. They were tears of relief. They were just like, I'm not alone. And suddenly everything began to lift in my soul, and I sensed this new, renewed energy coming back to me. You're not alone, firstly. This is what this psalm teaches us. And secondly, we learn from this psalmist to pour out our soul to God. Because it's interesting, he says, these things I remember as I pour out my soul. To whom? To God. And very often when we have feelings in our soul, we do a couple of things sometimes. One thing we do is we talk to friends. And some of us, you might not be a believer in God, or and you might not go to church, but you might have some really good friends. You know, if you're going through stuff, you know, you can pick up the phone, you can go around, you can get a coffee when you can, and you can just share. You can just say exactly how you're feeling, what's going on, and they will listen, they will be there, they will help you. If you're a Christian, or if you're a believer in God, what can often happen is this, that actually we should be praying to God. And so you talk to God, but you never actually tell him how you really feel. So you talk about the niceties of your life, some things, and your prayers are very polite, but they're not authentic. You're not actually pouring out your soul to God. You're telling him a few nice things that you think he might want to hear, making a few prayer points, and then moving on. Because you don't want to upset God and really let him know how you really feel about life. Both of these things are actually only part of the way. Because venting to friends is good, pouring out our souls to our friends is good, but actually our friends cannot help us at the deep spiritual level. They can't touch us at the deepest parts. And equally, if we go to God but aren't authentic in our prayers and just share what we're feeling no matter what, it's a bit like we go to the doctors and, we've got, I've got some really serious ailment, but I tell him about my cold and my snivel I've had because I don't actually want to tell him the real thing. And the doctor is sitting right there 6 feet away who could actually help me. It's just like that. Like the one being who could actually help us is there, but we're too polite to actually share what's going on and he can't help. And what we need to do is to come into the presence of God and pour out our soul to him. Tell him stuff. And it's interesting because he says here, basically he's saying, as a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God, my soul thirsts for you. He's saying actually, God, I don't feel like I'm drinking from you right now. My soul feels dry and empty. So what does he do? He just tells God, my soul feels dry and empty. So what do you do if you don't feel like you've got any energy for God? That can happen sometimes. You just tell God, I don't feel like I've got any energy for you. What if you feel like God's presence is far from you? Well, you just tell God, I feel like your presence is far from me right now. You tell God exactly how you feel, and then he can come. Because here's the thing, your spiritual life is not marked by depression. Your spiritual life is not graded by your spiritual numbness. Your spiritual life is marked by the righteousness of Jesus Christ. And he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he is at the right hand of God our Father. And he exists on high. And your righteousness cannot be touched. It is kept safe in heaven. So your spiritual life is not determined by how you feel. It's determined by Jesus Christ. Therefore, you can just share exactly what's going on because it does not affect your spiritual standing with God. He wants you to be real. So you just share exactly what's going on. If you're struggling to believe that he actually cares for your life, you tell him that. God, I'm struggling. I doesn't feel like you care about me right now. Read the psalmist. They are brutally honest with God. You read Job, it will make some religious people blush. You think, can you really talk to God like that? Absolutely, because he knows it already. He knows it already, so just share with him. And also, just want to say this, that personal meditation on where we're actually at is really important. Because the psalmist says this 3 times, which is why commentators connect Psalm 42 and 43 together, because he closes with the same refrain. He says this, why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. What is he doing there? He's actually moving from talking to God, and he's not talking to God, he's not talking to a friend. Who is he talking to? He's actually talking to himself. Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me? And I had a little epiphany a few weeks ago, because I'd always read this question like the psalmist was kind of beating himself up. Like, Christian, you have no reason to be depressed. You have no reason to be down right now. Why are you feeling down? Like, hope in God. Like he was telling himself off. Like he was being cross with himself. Like, you're being so stupid, soul. You have no reason to be down. You've got glory awaiting you. Jesus is your salvation. He's done everything for you. Like, stop being stupid. Hope in God. And yet it suddenly dawned on me that this question, someone pointed out, this just saying this is a question. It's not beating himself up. He's asking himself questions about his own soul. He's sitting and taking an inventory as to how he's actually doing. He's sitting, as it were, reflecting and journaling and meditating and thinking and analyzing, taking an audit of why am I feeling like I'm feeling? Which is totally different. So rather than him beating himself up, he's actually trying to grow in self-knowledge. He's trying to grow in the understanding of what are the causes, internal and external, around me that are leading me to feel down, which is such an important thing to do. Now, I just want to encourage you again, church, to if you're ever feeling down, don't leave your feelings as these amorphous things out there. Like, ask God, help me now. And let me encourage you to get a journal, get a moleskin, get something, and just write some stuff down. Like, what is it that's causing me to feel down? Because it's a normal human experience, but we want to deal with it. So a couple of times during lockdown, I just did that. And I realized one of the big things for me was, as soon as lockdown happened, so much stuff got cancelled. And the only thing that I could think about was when lockdown was going to finish. So Tori and I, we believe that we're called to London for the long term. We believe we're here for many, many years, decades. We feel like this is our calling to see a great spiritual awakening in this city that we love. And suddenly all this vision and this passion for the long-term health of London had disappeared. The only thing I was thinking about was, when will lockdown end? Which isn't a very inspiring vision. And suddenly I realized that the energy was dissipating. So I've lost a passion. What will the church be like in 10 years' time? Those kind of dreams. What will London be like in 10 years' time? I'd lost vision. I realized being stuck in the study was not serving my soul well. Just sat at a screen all day long and kind of very blurred line. I realized I missed the commute. For some of you that sounds crazy, but I just missed jumping on the district line. I missed that kind of like that ritual of jumping on the tube, and the thinking space and the praying space and the reading space and the demarcation between work and family life and all of those things. I realized it was actually affecting and as soon as I wrote them down and realized them, what it meant is that I could deal with it and say, okay, this is going to be okay because I know this is going to end. This is going to be okay because I know God's bigger than this. This is going to be okay because I know some promises that counteract this feeling right now. So let me encourage you to do what the psalmist does and take a self-inventory. And let me also say this. We've got to learn, Trinity, to talk to ourselves. Not in a crazy I've been by myself for too long kind of way, but actually talk to ourselves in a helpful way rather than listening to ourselves. Because very often our hearts are constantly producing new and fearful speculations about our life and the future. I don't know if you've noticed that. If you kind of just leave everything quiet around you, your heart will very naturally produce fearful speculations about what might happen with your job, with your finances, with your friends, with your calling. All of these things, anxiety can arise about your future. And what we're told is that we need to talk to ourselves, because he talks to himself. He says, then he says, soul, hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. Hope in God, soul. He's talking to himself. Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, who was a preacher in the 1900s in Westminster, he says this: have you realized that most of your unhappiness in life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself? Take those thoughts that come to you the moment you wake up in the morning. You have not originated them, but they are talking to you, and they bring back the problems of yesterday. Somebody is talking to you, but who is talking to you? Yourself is talking to you. And now this man's treatment in Psalm 42, he says this: instead of allowing this self-talk to talk to him, he starts talking to himself. Why are you cast down, O my soul? His soul has been depressing him, crushing him. So he stands up and he says, self, listen for a moment. I will speak to you. So we have to learn to take our souls in hand and essentially say, soul, be quiet. You need to listen to some truth. I'm going to take you in hand because there is a God out there who loves me, and I'm going to talk to you and remind you of the gospel. We have to become preachers, but not to crowds, to ourselves. We need to learn not just to be concerned with preaching to other people's hearts, but preaching to our own hearts. Be missionaries to our own hearts so that we can apply the gospel to our own souls. So talk to ourselves. And last thing I wanted to say before I talk about Jesus again is that these are days to reorder our priorities, because I think many people have. We've lost things, we've lost jobs. Some of us have been put on furlough, we've been given more time and space. Some of us have just been crushed by the overwhelming demands of work and family and homeschooling. And there's been a sense in which there's been a corporate reassessment of our priorities. What are the things we want to go back to? What is the new normal going to be? You know, Tora and I are thinking about it. You know, our new normal, like, what are the things we want to pick up again? What are the things actually in this moment now we leave pre-COVID-19? We think, actually, that's a thing for the past. What do we want to... And we're talking about this. What are the priorities that we need to give ourselves to? And this is what the psalmist is doing. And he's saying, hope in God 3 times. He says, hope in God. He is reordering his priorities around God himself. Because it's this really interesting thing. He is struggling. He has enemies around him. And in this day, an enemy wasn't like someone who said something nasty to me on Twitter, which isn't pleasant, but these were people that actually wanted them killed. These were days where violence was rife, where javelins would be thrown at your chest to kill you there and then. And he had reasons to fear. But what does he do? He doesn't say, hope in the fact that one day I'll be through this season, I'll be living my life of comfort again. No, he almost puts comfort to one side. He puts his enemies to one side, and he reorders his heart around God and says, the one thing that I am hoping for is God. So he's saying, I'm not in a sense concerned with how this season is going to end in life, but what I want to do is reprioritize my heart around God, that I might be centered around God, that my soul might be satisfied in God, that I might find a spiritual awakening in God again. This is my priority, because I know that if my soul is full, if I drink deeply from the wells of God, then I can walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and I will fear no evil, for he is with me. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. I won't fear. I know I can live with an inner strength if I have God. And so he says, soul, hope in God. Which means that sometimes the end of these seasons can actually be bittersweet. Because do we, in a sense, get what the world says that we need in life? Maybe not. Maybe we don't get what the world says is a successful life. But if we get God, if we get God, we get everything. In this life and in the life to come. Absolutely everything. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, Jesus tells us, and everything will be given to us. Everything will be ours in Jesus Christ. So reorder your hopes and priorities around God. And let me just close by talking about Jesus, because he's the reason why we're here. And Jesus will have heard these Psalms being read in the synagogue when he was a young man. He would have memorized these Psalms. He would have prayed these Psalms. It's very likely that this Psalm was used as part of an evening liturgy to sing, because we're told in verse 8, by day the Lord commands his steadfast life, and at night his song is with me. And we're told that the choir master would give this as a song. Jesus probably sang this. Jesus also lives this like no one else. Because not only are you not alone because the psalmist experiences the same thing, Jesus knows what it's like to walk through dark valleys. He knows what it's like to be spiritually depressed. He knows what it's like to have a loss of hope and vision. We're told in the Garden of Gethsemane he sweat blood because of the stress and the pressure that he was under. If you have felt overwhelmed, Jesus knows what it's like to feel overwhelmed and crushed under the weight of life. He knows what it's like not to feel like he's got any strength to go any further. Jesus knows what it's like to pour out his soul to God, just to tell him everything. He says in that garden in Gethsemane, if there's any way, Lord, I want this cup to pass from me. I do not want to die and experience hell on this cross. I don't want to experience the wrath that is on others. I don't want to experience that. Is there any way, please take it from me? He poured out his soul and was brutally honest with his Father. And he knows what it's like to continually reorder his priorities around God, the only man who has ever lived with perfect priorities in his life, who always had the Father as his first priority, who in the end, at the very end of his life, after saying, I always only do what the Father is doing, in the end, when he's faced with the cross to take on our suffering and our shame and our sin, in that moment, he says, Lord, not my will, but your will be done. To the very last moment, he kept God as his priority, and he walked willingly to the cross and suffered the only moment where a man in this life was actually truly alone from the presence of God. Because the psalmist here felt like he was alone, but he was not alone. We can feel alone, but we're not actually alone. Jesus Christ felt alone because he was actually alone. Throughout his whole life, he'd called God his Father. He walked in intimate fellowship with God. And yet when it came to the cross, he hung there, not surrounded by any on earth and not surrounded by any in heaven, and left utterly alone. So for the first time in life, he doesn't cry, my Father, but he cries as he hangs on this cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he was spiritually abandoned, left utterly alone, so that we would never, ever, ever have to be left alone in this life or in the next. So that we can walk through every moment and into death and through death, knowing that God will be with us every step of the way. And we don't have to fear. Jesus experienced everything of this psalm and more, so that we can experience the fullness of God. And that's what I pray for us, that as we walk out of lockdown into some new normal, we would know a spiritual awakening, and that our souls would become alive like a flower in the garden in the springtime. Suddenly new life would be resurrected in our souls. New color, new vitality, new strength, new faith, new confidence, new boldness, new generosity would arise, and a spiritual awakening in the Church of Jesus Christ would be coming about in these days, because London needs a spiritual awakening. I'm just going to encourage you, wherever you are now, in a garden, outside, in the living room, would you respond and just give your heart to God in these moments? Bless you.